guys, hi, how's it going? How you doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today I'm doing my next video in my palette roulette series in which I pick a palette that is in my collection that might also be in your collection, and I utilize it for a week, and then I come back to you and I talk to you about my experiences with the palette. I show you some live swatches, and you also get some pictures of the looks I was able to create with the palette, and we pick another palette. Yeah, it's a fun time here, so I hope that that sounds like something you're interested in. Today we are doing an Urban Decay moment. All three palettes that I worked with over the last couple weeks were Urban Decay palettes. These days I am doing this video every other week instead of every week, so I have a little bit more time with the palettes that I'm choosing. Again, I hope that sounds like something that you're looking forward to seeing today, and if so, please keep on watching. For those of you new here, hi, my name is Donna. I'm a lover of all things high and colorful beauty and self-care. I also work in the beauty industry as a field leader for Ulta Beauty. I get a lot of education in my position. I like to bring you that education, but ultimately, I'm just out here talking about makeup because I really like to talk about makeup, and I hope that you also like to talk about makeup because I am kind of a chatty channel. So if a chatty channel is what you're looking for, I do hope that my channel will bring solace to your soul in the way it brings solace to mine. And with that said, let's roll into this review of these three Urban Decay palettes. Okay, since I have three palettes to go over, I really do think it's important that we jump right into this, but for some housekeeping, I'm working with natural light here. It is a little bit doom and gloom out there, but the sun keeps peeking through, so if the light shifts and changes, that is why. We have three Urban Decay palettes, and I want to just jump in because I do think that it's going to take us a minute to get through all three of these. The first one I want to talk about is this one, which is the Urban Decay Half Baked palette. This is a palette that came to me through Gratis, and it is a $33 eyeshadow palette. It's considered one of their minis, and it was one of three mini naked palettes when it launched last year. We had Sin, which was blush toned, we had Foxy, which was olive toned, and then we have this one, Half Baked, which is bronze toned. So the front of the palette looks like this. It looks a little bit like alphabet soup, which I kind of loved about it. And then the back just looks like this. It has a sticker that says Half Baked on it, and I mean, that's pretty much it on the back. And then this is what the color story looks like. I think that you guys can see that this is definitely bronzy. It is considered a limited edition palette, but I still see it for sale online. Again, it was $33 for 6 shades, 0.12 ounces of product total, or 0.02 ounces per pan. Those are some pretty tiny eyeshadow pans, to be honest, smaller than the normal size, like way back when ABH eyeshadow pans by 0.01 ounces. So not super small, but also not super big. Here's the thing, eyeshadow takes you forever to get through. So I'm not mad that the eyeshadow pans are only 0.02 ounces a piece. This had 4.8 stars on the Urban Decay website with 791 reviews on it. 4.7 stars on Google with a little over 4.2k reviews. And then 4.6 stars on Sephora with about 1,733 reviews. Now keep in mind that a lot of those reviews are based on one of the three minis, not necessarily this mini specifically. They are vegan. This is a cruelty-free option, and this one was inspired by the one shade Half Baked, which is this shade here, which is in a permanent palette. And from what I can tell, all of these were in a permanent palette. I don't think any of these are new to this palette, from what I can tell. Now, I couldn't get very much research done, and I don't have a plethora of Urban Decay palettes in my collection. It's not typically an eyeshadow formula that I steer towards, so I couldn't really find them in any other palette, but I couldn't find that this stated that these were singularly to this palette, if that makes any sense. I would say that it's not bad. You're going to get about a 7-hour wear time out of this. I love that it has a mirror. I love that it's claspable. It's a really nice, neutral, basic travel palette for you if that's what you like. It does have 3 shimmers in it and 3 mattes. The 3 mattes are this one, which is actually kind of more of a satin matte, and then this one and this one. These two are actually quite nice mattes, really deep mattes that help to build an eye look. I don't love that this one is more of a satin because it does have quite a bit of a sheen to it, and it makes it nearly impossible to use it as a transition color, which a lot of people use those creamier shades as transition when they're, you know, my skin tone or more fair. I mean, there's not much that I can say about this palette. It is, you know, kind of the boring of the boring. It does have about a 7-hour wear time to it. I do think it's best over a primer, both for performance and for longevity. Performance-wise, it blends fine without a primer underneath it, but I feel like it blends better with a primer underneath it. I also feel like it definitely lasts longer when there's a primer underneath it than when there isn't. I would say you're going to get, you know, significant fading around that 5 or 6 hour mark when there's not a primer underneath it, and when there is a primer underneath it, it definitely lasts 7, potentially 8 hours before you're seeing significant fading. And just a couple things I have to say about it in terms of my collection is I feel like it's just way too one-noted, if I'm honest with you. You get, you know, the same eye look out of this palette every single time because there's not a whole lot of variety to it. It is a mini eyeshadow palette. It's 6 pans of eyeshadow, and that's not saying good, bad, nor indifferent things about it. It just means it's a one and done eyeshadow palette. If you're going to take it with you on vacation or traveling, know that you're just going to get a muted brown eye look every single time, and that has to be okay with you. That's not something that I love particularly, so I don't know how long-lived this palette is for my collection, honestly, but I did really love this deep brown shade. It was a really nice shade, to be honest. I didn't experience a whole lot of fallout with this palette, which was pleasing because it is kind of powdery in the pan, to be honest. And I just feel like it's just kind of an okay palette, in my humble opinion. We're going to do our swatches. So the first one is Roulette, which is kind of a pastel yellow almost. I would say it's more pastel yellow than it is cream. It's definitely satin. It's got a little bit of a sheeniness to it. It's super soft and silky in the pan though, and to the touch. It applies really, really well. And then we have Half Baked, which is a shimmer, and what this palette is based around. This is a very light, coppery, peachy shimmer, and it is truly beautiful. It has kind of a pearliness to it. Then we have Rocky. Rocky is a peachy pink, kind of duochrome. It kind of shifts from peach to gold, and with a little bit of like pinky shimmer in there. It's really super pretty. And then we have Buck Off, which is the first of the true mattes here. It's kind of a peachy brown matte. Then we have Breadwinner, which is a beautiful copper metallic. With this one, I think I saw the most fallout out of the bunch, and that's not to say it was a large amount of fallout, because you heard me say I didn't get a whole lot of fallout from this palette. I really didn't. And then the last one I'm going to put over here, it's the deepest matte in the palette, and one I truly did enjoy, and it is called Edible. It's a really dark brown matte that leans kind of cool, but has a warmth to it that makes it look really good with all the shadows in this palette. That is that palette in a nutshell. Again, I don't think that there's anything wrong with this palette. I really did enjoy working with most of the shades in this palette, which was surprising for me because, as I stated earlier, I'm not a huge Urban Decay eyeshadow fan. I feel like, number one, They blended really super well. It was really hard to make a mistake with this palette. And number two, they built really well. So I was able to get a little more like intensity or opacity out of an eyeshadow that I didn't feel maybe initially applied opaque. That's one thing I would say about these is they initially come across as a little more sheer than I thought that they would, but it is also very like light in tone. So that might be part of the problem. This one was truly beautiful, but like I said, had a little bit of a fallout issue. I really, really love the deep, deep brown in this palette for deepening up just about any eye look. And yeah, I'm not mad at that palette, but again, I just don't know how long it's gonna last in my collection because it's very one-noted in a way that doesn't suit my makeup aesthetic, which is fine. I wish I would have gotten... We got to choose which palette we wanted, and why I chose the half-baked one, I will never, ever know. But I wish I would have chosen maybe the Foxy one instead with kind of the greens in it. I think I was consumed by the fact that this had this like duochrome shade in it, but it's not super shifty for a duochrome. Like, you have to know it's a duochrome to see that it's a duochrome. So there is that. The next palette I want to go over is this one, which is the Robin Eisenberg palette, and I would typically hold this one for last because it's got the most shades in it, but there's some like other things that I want to talk about with this palette. This is the Urban Decay Naked X Robin Eisenberg palette, and this is the container for the component, the box, and it's just beautiful. I mean, from the minute you look at it, it's beautiful, and then you see what it has to offer inside, and it's also beautiful. And if you know anything about the artist, I will pop some pictures up here of some of her art. She is an LA-based artist who does very vivid neon, kind of alien-esque portraits of normal women, day-to-day, like, stuff, tasks, looking out a window, taking a shower, doing other things. She does have some really explicit artwork as well, but beautiful. Every single one of them is gorgeous. And as I said, it's all done in these vivid neon colors. I do think that Urban Decay could have gone quite far with this palette and then just kind of fell short of it. So this is what the palette looks like on the packaging. It looks very much like the box of it. The only difference is that this part of the palette inside is like glittery. It almost looks like a night sky or a dusky sky. And then these are two ladies from Robin Eisenberg's, you know, iconic artwork. And then the back of the palette just has some gold printing on it. None of it is raised on the back. It is like not fingerprint proof, obviously. It's going to show all your fingerprints on the front. The naked part of this is raised, where it says Urban Decay is raised, but Robin Eisenberg is not necessarily raised. And this does look like it's a plexiglass piece over the top of the artwork piece, almost kind of 3D in nature, but not really. You open it up, it has a nice size mirror on it, and it looks like any other Urban Decay Naked palette in how it is set up. The only difference is this has, you know, some really vibrant, what appears to be vibrant reds and vibrant blues and kind of periwinkle eye shades. When you look at the front of the palette, again, I just think that they could have gone so far with the color story in here, but this is what they've given us. And I'm not necessarily sure that this isn't a beautiful palette. I do think that it's a beautiful palette, but if you cover up like these shades here, it just looks like any other Urban Decay palette minus that like pink maybe, right? There's not a whole lot of color actually in this palette. There are 12 shades and they're described as rich cosmic shades in an intergalactic palette with Martian mattes and meteor shower shimmers, and it is a limited edition eyeshadow palette. It's $54, although right now you can get it half off all Urban Decay palettes. If you let them sit for a little bit on your shelf, they will go half off, every single one of them. It does have 0.492 ounces of product in it, or 0.041 ounces per pan, which is about twice what you're getting in one of these mini pans, which makes sense because this is a full-size palette. It also is vegan and cruelty-free. It has a 4.6 star rating on Sephora with 750 reviews. Has a 4.7 star rating on Amazon with 75 reviews. I would say that this does have a really great color story, and it goes easily from neutral to like a little more vivid, a little more bright, a little more colorful eye look, but only slightly does it get a little more vivid, a little more colorful. I mean, even this one here that is, you know, right smack in the middle of the neutrals and the blues, looks and appears to be very, very red, and it actually is kind of like a ruddy, rusty brown. I think that overall the mattes were super easy to blend. It was almost like you didn't have to have, you know, any kind of skill to make the blend happen, which I thought was great. But the shimmers were dry and they were kind of firm, and this made them a little bit harder to pick up on a brush, and it made it a little bit harder for them to stick to your eye without there being some kind of like eye glue to help them stick. Though once you got them to that place, like, they were fantastic. But it is necessary to use a glitter glue with the glitters in this palette in order to make them stick to the eye. And there's quite a few, like these three here, this one here, this one here, this one here, and quasi this one here are all kind of very glittery, but specifically these three back here that are the blues and the greens. I do think that the wear time on this was approximately 7 hours without seeing any kind of, you know, fading or movement in the shadow. But I also think that there was a pretty significant amount of fallout with this palette that didn't exist with the other one. It was almost to a detriment because I couldn't get it to stick on my eyelid, but it was falling all over my face and I couldn't get it off my face. So that's how I felt about it. It's definitely best with the primer. Much like the mattes in this palette, it's not that they didn't blend without a primer. I just felt like they went over the eye with a lot more ease when you're using a primer than when you're not. And I do feel like they stayed longer on an eye look when you're using a primer than when you're not. Relatively easy to use, and I would definitely recommend this to somebody who maybe doesn't play with eyeshadow very much, maybe is somebody who's new to eyeshadow, maybe even somebody who's new to color, because this really doesn't have a whole lot of color in it, even though it appears that it does. These are the 4 most colorful shades, and 3 of those are glitters, so 3 of those are going to be things that you put on your lid space anyways, and not really anywhere else on your eye. I mean, if a person wanted to dabble in color but feels more comfortable in like neutrals, this would be a palette that I would suggest to them because it doesn't really go super crazy colorful, in my humble opinion. Alright, so swatching this guy here, the first shade we have is that cream satin, and it is called Moonstone. It is a light beige, kind of swinging again on the yellow side. It reminds me a lot of the one in the other palette. The only difference is this handles a lot more matte than it does satin. It has a lot less sheen to it than the other one does. Otherwise, I would swear they were the same shade. The next one is Solar Storm. Solar Storm is a rosy brown matte. Then I have Pulsar. Pulsar is a light peach frosty duochrome. I felt like this one reminded me a lot of the duochrome in the Half Baked palette, to be honest. I think that many of the shades in this palette could have doubled as shades in the Half Baked palette. Then I have Ion, which is a gold metallic. I would say that this is probably one of the better shimmers. It didn't really fall out. There wasn't a whole lot of opacity issues that I had with it. It stayed on my eye. I didn't really need to pull in glitter glue, it was a really great shimmer, and that's a lot because I hate golds. So it's a lot for me to admit to. Then we have Mango Sun. Mango Sun is a really beautiful coral peach matte. This, in my humble opinion, was the best matte in this bunch. Okay, then we have Exoplanet, which is a reddish pinky pearl. This one wore really well. It's a really beautiful matte. It kind of has a fuchsia kick to it. It almost is a little bit duochromy, but not quite. And if it's a duochrome like the other duochromes in this palette and the other one, it really does take a lot to see the shift in the duochromes for Urban Decay. They have just such a slight shift. Then we have Foxfire. Foxfire is a milky like rust red. This one also wore really well, and I loved partnering it with the pinky peach down here. And then we have Holidays. Holidays was probably the worst for fallout in this palette. It is a beautiful burgundy metallic though, and it wore really well. It had kind of like almost a purpliness to it, like an iris color almost. I loved this all over the eye with even that like this color right here as the shadow that I used to blend out the eye look. Home Planet, and it's a periwinkle satin that actually has more of a matte kick to it. Again, the satins in this palette lean a little more matte than they do satin, so I was really thankful for that. And then I have Ice Crater. Ice Crater is considered a warm purple frosty pearl shade, and I would say that it's more blue than it is purple. I mean, you guys, I think, can see that actually in the swatch as well. And the last two, we have this one, which is called Alien Babe. It's a dark blue in a black base. It's mostly glitter, lots of fallout here. And then we have this one, which is Space Pod, which is a teal. I think I maybe forgot to turn on my audio. That's happened a lot lately, and I'm super sorry about that. This is a teal blue green in a blackened base, also mostly glitter, and I think that you guys can see there isn't a whole lot of difference between these three. I would love to have seen like a deep purple matte, or even a purple shimmer, an actual red shimmer, like something that goes along with the case a lot, or the packaging of this a lot better than just those three shimmers there. I'm not wholeheartedly mad at this palette. I do think it's got some really beautiful shades. Like I said, I think that it works really well and blends really well. Even, you know, some of the shadows that you wouldn't expect to blend very well, much like that periwinkle one, really did blend fantastically. Very great blendable palette, nice and buildable, but I wouldn't say that it is one of my favorite formulas for sure. I think that the glitters really fell out so much, and the fact that I couldn't really get them to stay on my eyelid, but they wanted to be all over my face and wouldn't come off, really was frustrating. It's not a horrible palette. I love the artwork on the palette, but again, I'm just not sure how long that palette has to last in my collection. That one was a launch this year. I do believe it was maybe their holiday launch. It came out in September, like late September, and I did buy it for full price. Obviously, it's one of those palettes that really grabbed me and I couldn't let go of it. My mom also kind of peer pressured me into buying it, so there's that. The last palette that I have to go over is this one here. This is the Urban Decay Wired palette, and this actually came out as a limited edition press pigment palette that I believe was meant to partner with the Urban Decay Electric palette, or as a sister or almost twin, because there's duplicate shades in here, to the Urban Decay Electric palette. For those of you that don't know, I have the Urban Decay Electric palette. It's the catalyst for my YouTube channel, to be honest, and this is one of my absolute favorite palettes that I have in my collection. It is so old. I started my YouTube channel in 2017, and I bought that palette the May before the August that I started my channel. So it's not, I mean, it's 5 years old, but it's not hugely old in my collection. So I didn't really need a whole nother palette with these colors, but I was anxious to purchase this palette when it first came out because I love the Urban Decay Electric palette, and I would jump at the chance to have an extra version that had some similar shades, but also some different shades. So this is a palette that when it was for sale, it was $39. It's no longer for sale, obviously. It was a limited edition palette. This is what the front of it looks like, and this wired is a raised lettering, so kind of a bugger to store, if I'm honest. But I mean, not as bad as some palettes are. The back of it looks like this, just a regular black packaging. It is matte packaging, so you know, fingerprints, you can't really see them. It does have a really nice mirror on it, and these are the shadows in this palette. There are 4 shadows in this palette over here that are signified by a line down the center that tell you that these shadows are not safe for eye use. The other 6 are, which is why this is called a pressed pigment palette, but there are 10 shadows in here. Now, I have used all these eyeshadows on my eyes. That's not saying that you should or shouldn't. That's just saying I'm not afraid of the pigments that are not safe for eye use. In my experience, they've not really irritated my eyes. They have caused some staining, but that's it. And the FDA isn't necessarily keeping up with what is and isn't, you know, right for products that go into makeup. So while these are not safe for eye use in the US, according to the FDA, they are perfectly safe for eye use in other countries. So I take one for the team and I put them on my eyes. As a matter of fact, Savage is on my eye look today, so is Gravity. There are 2 shimmers, 4 mattes, 4 satin mattes out of those 10 shades, and this does have 4 stars on Macy's with 104 people that have reviewed the palette. 100% have to admit that this is no sister to this. This performs so much better than this. These definitely do not have any kind of opacity. They are very, very sheer. This buildup of this blue here, which is this blue here, which I understand is a very light blue, but I do have a white base on my eyes, and this is about 15 layers of that blue to get it to this opacity, which is nearly nothing. This launched in 2020 as an electric palette revamp, and this is no revamp. This should never have happened. They should have just left what was awesome and maybe brought that palette back out instead of revamping it into the quality that this is right here. This is nothing that I would ever recommend or suggest for anybody interested in, you know, even neon tones. This is not a great palette. You must have a primer to even be able to see these shadows on your eye. Like I said, I have a white base primer all over my eye, and the biggest reason why is because if I were using these, and when I did use these without any kind of primer on my eye, or just a regular old primer, right? Not a white base primer, just a regular old primer, they did not show up on my eye look. They also faded away and blended away to absolutely nothing on my eye look. It's not blendable at all. It blends away to nothing, or it becomes super, super patchy. It's not buildable when you try and build the color on top of each other. So I've built some of the purple, some of this purple up onto the pink in this eye look, and it voided the pink and left next to no purple on the eye look. I have this blue built into the inner corner here, and you can't even really tell that that blue is built into the inner corner because it just picks up the shadow underneath it and then blends it away when it's also being blended away. You might as well not put eyeshadow on your eyes if your intention is to build the colors up. What I would say is that this white is fantastic. It is, like, I know I've said this probably 3 times in the last year, but this is now at the top of the list for best whites in my collection. I love this white. It is amazing. I loved it in my brow bone. I loved it in my inner corner. Almost every look I did, specifically when working with these creamier, yellower whites, and those two, and those having more of a satin mix to it. This is definitely a matte. They put this in there though to create some kind of like difference in the eye look that you're able to create with these vivid eyeshadows. So you could put it down or blend out this blue with that white, and it's going to make it less deep dark blue. But newsflash, it's not that deep and dark when you put it on your eye in the first place. So the whole point of having that white in here is like nearly null and void, because you don't need it to get sheerness out of this palette. You don't need it to get a lighter tone out of the shades in this palette, because they're already are not amazing. I don't need this palette in my collection, in my humble opinion, when I have something much, much better in my collection. So with that said, the wear time on this guy is about 4 to 5 hours with a primer. Without a primer, you're going to get tops 2 hours before you see noticeable fading. This is not a great palette if you want to go anywhere but in the house. And if you want to do anything but maybe record a video right as soon as you're done with your eye look. The mattes are super, super powdery, and all of them had a heavy amount of fallout, and the like shimmers in this palette are more satin. I'm not a huge advocate for satin mattes. I'm also not totally against them, but these ones just didn't work for poop. Like this purple is one of those satin mattes, and it doesn't work. Like, can you see it even in my eye look? Like barely in this crease right here, and that is it. It just doesn't, they don't adhere to the eyeballs. They don't adhere. I think that's the best way to say that. So I'm going to swatch these, and then I'm going to swatch some of the similar shades out of here and show you just exactly what I mean. The first shadow we have is this one, which is Glitch, and it is the white. That is so beautiful. It's a white matte. Then we have Chaos, which is an indigo blue, and this one is considered a satin matte. Then we have Shock, which is a lilac. This is actually considered a satin, and this is one of those satins that I would say performs more as a matte. Then we have the purple, which is called Gravity, and it is considered a shimmer. And then we have the neon purple, neon pink, which is Savage, and that is a matte. Those last two, the purple and the pink, are the not safe for eye shades on the top row. Okay, and then we have Fluorescent, which is they call it a neon blue turquoise, and this is a matte. Then we have Current, which is a green, and they call it a shimmer. Then we have Jolt, which is the neon green matte. They call it a satin. I don't think it's a satin. Then we have Tangerine, which is it's a matte, and it is called Switch. It is one of the not safe for eye use shades. And then we have Slow Burn, which is like a neon red, and they call it a satin, but I definitely don't. I mean, I think that's definitely it performs more like a matte. You know, the one thing it's got going for it is it does swatch well, except for this shade right here. I think that you guys can see that turquoise is sad. There's a lot of voiding in this, just the swatch, which doesn't typically happen a lot in swatches. I've not had any problem with these staining. I've also not had any problem with these irritating my eyes. So now I'm going to show you some of the similar shades in this palette versus the other one. So this is Jolt from the Wired palette, and this is Jolt from the Electric palette. I think that you guys can see just in the finger swatches how different they are. So this is the Wired palette Jolt, and this is Urban Decay Electric. Now, keep in mind, this palette is 5 years old in my collection. I'm going to go into Slow Burn from Wired on this finger. And I'm going to go into Slow Burn from Electric on this finger. Again, I think that you guys can tell in just the swatch, but this is Slow Burn from the Wired palette. And this is Slow Burn from the Electric palette. They're just different. They're just different shades. The opacity is just not there. This one's a little more orange, whereas this one's a little more red. Like, I understand that they maybe had to change a little bit of the formulation, but I mean, even look at Slow Burn on my knuckles where it had the Electric palette. It's like orangey red stained, and the other ones are gone at this point. So I'm going to take Savage, which was part of the reason why I fell in love with the Electric palette, and then Savage from the Electric palette. Now, Savage in the Electric palette also feels completely different than the one in the Wired palette, and it always has. So this is from the Wired palette, and then this is from Urban Decay Electric. Let's do Chaos, which is the blue. I think both of these palettes, those shades, feel the exact same, but I mean, I think that you can see, again, just the color. This is from the Wired palette, and this is from Electric. Those are the four that are in both palettes. In addition to that, like, there is like a good amount of like staining that happens with Electric that isn't happening in this palette. So it's more than just this is a completely different palette. I feel like those shades are completely different formulas. So with that said, I think that you can tell there's just a giant disappointment in this palette that doesn't exist with what's going on in this palette. With that said, I do think that this is a palette that I am going to declutter, because I don't ever see me pulling for this when I can pull for this or something else in my collection that has those same kind of shades. The other two I'm going to keep in my collection for a minute, just to see like how I get along with these. This one I actually might get rid of, but for now they're both going to stay in. I want to see, you know, if I'm actually going to think about using those palettes. I am going to, there is one caveat to this. I am going to pull out this white shade because I love that white shade. The rest of it is going. If I can figure out how to depot that, it's coming out of that palette. If it's not depotable, then I'm going to keep that palette just for that one white shade. How stupid is that? I need to find that one white shade in another palette. This eye look that I did, I am happy with this eye look. It's mostly out of this palette. I think the only color that isn't out of this palette is out of this palette, and it's this shade here, which is kind of that peachy pink dual chrome. It's a beautiful eye look, but I have dark blue on the inner corner, and I have dark purple on the outer V, and it just doesn't, it's just not translated that way because this eyeshadow palette is poop. All right, I'm gonna go pick my new palettes. I will be right back. Okay, I think I'm gonna go with a yin and yang of each other this week and go with all the color versus no color. And these are both affordable palettes. These both come from the drugstore side. So I have the Winky Lux Galaxy Kitten palette. I think this is like a $12 eyeshadow palette, and it's all like themed around the galaxy, right? We have grays and whites, and we have a black or a charcoaly color. We have kind of like this gray toned lilac. We have some really great monochromatic, like static eyeshadows in this palette. Grays and definitely cool tones, and you know, something I've found myself fond of over the last several months. And then we have Juvia's Place Garden of Juvia's, which is a whole lot of color. So the closest thing to not color is this one down here, which is called Oh Honey, which is kind of a pinky, rosy, peachy toned brown. The rest of it, oh, and this one, which is called Gardenia, which is a cream color. So I think that these two will make the perfect yin and yang match. I have a little bit of color, a little bit of not color, and I'm excited to see some of the eye looks that I can come up with this. I want to challenge myself. This is very dark and dismal, and this is very bright, and so you're going to get a little bit of bright and a little bit of dark and dismal, but I also think that I can marry these two palettes together quite well. Honestly, the only overlap that they have is like this like beigey tone here with that beigey tone there, but I think that one's a little more pink than the other one, so I think I can marry them quite well, and I think I'm actually going to have a really good time with this. We're going to see. We might get a lot of these kind of eye looks. That's okay. They're probably bound and determined to be better than this one specifically. So there's that. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that I didn't keep you here for 400 years. I hope that you enjoyed it, that you'll want to give it a big thumbs up, that you liked it so much you want to subscribe before you go. I would love to welcome you to my YouTube fam here. Thank you guys so much for watching me today. I hope that you and yours are well, that you're healthy, that you're staying safe out there. And until next time, bye friends.